does not like. All right. Welcome to Contract Wednesday. And it does not look like it's recording. It does. All right. We're going to cover Form 22J. Sorry for the bumpy start, but last time I did this, it didn't record the second video. So Form 22J, the lead-based paint addendum. This one is really pretty straightforward, but we're going to cover it in great detail so that we have a record of this for training purposes. So long story short, lead-based paint was banned in 1978, and so any home that was built prior to 1978 has the potential and likelihood of having lead-based paint in it. The reality is I've sold thousands of houses and I've never had anybody test when I represented the buyer for lead-based paint. When I've represented the seller, I've only had it happen a couple of times. And that's because if this building we're sitting in was built in 1920, there's an absolute guarantee that there's lead-based paint in the building, right? But there's also a guarantee now in 2016 that there's probably 5 to 10 layers of latex paint on top of that lead-based paint in most cases. So the probability of someone getting lead-based paint exposure is pretty close to zero, if not zero, unless you have small children that like to chew on walls and chew through the latex and get to the lead, right? So the lead-based paint is encapsulated. But the law requires that the seller disclose what they know and what records they might have. Then the buyer has the opportunity to decide if they're accepting of that information or if they want to do their own testing. And that's how this form reads. So what you will find is the sellers, in almost every instance, will come down here to the seller disclosure section, and they will mark that they have no knowledge, and they will mark that they have no reports or records. Then the buyer has the ability to say whether they want to waive the opportunity to conduct risk assessment or accept the opportunity to conduct risk assessment, right? So the most common is going to be waived. But how would I explain all this to a buyer? Because I don't want them to be persuaded to waive. I want them to understand what the risks are and decide for themselves. And I would do it not too different from what I just said, which is this home was built in X year. There's a good chance there's lead in the walls, but it's also lead paint that has been covered several times by latex paint. So it's unlikely that there's any risk, but it's up to you to decide whether you're comfortable with that risk. And they usually go, well, do you think the person who owns it now ever tested it? And I said, I would doubt it, only because I've done so many transactions and people never seem to test. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't. You should do whatever makes you feel comfortable. And then they decide. Now, the law says that the buyer cannot waive before the seller makes known what their disclosure is. So good listing brokers are going to put a 22J in the listing with those other boxes already checked and the seller's signature is already on it, right? Then you use their 22J and you decide whether you're going to check the waived box or not on the second page, and then you're done with this. Now, if they don't put that in the supplements, you're going to download a blank 22J, and technically, you're not supposed to mark waived before the seller indicates whether they know or have any records of lead-based paint. So, but do people do it that way? Not really. I can't think of an occasion where an agent didn't check waived because the seller had not yet made their disclosure. So my advice to you is, in a competitive market like this, I would mark waived, even though the law does not say you should do that, or does say you should not do that. Hopefully, it's a good listing broker that put a 22J in the listings and you just download that. Any questions?
Selling agent need to bring that brochure to the buyer to sign for it. Usually they receive this brochure
Yes.
tells everything about the lead paint.
Yep. So great question. I'm glad you asked, Ashley. If
I didn't hear it, Ed.
so her question was, should you give the buyer the brochure, which is the disclosure about lead-based paint? And the answer is yes.
Always.
And if you're using the Miller Lane VIP system, the disclosure is already in the folders up by the front door. So you can just grab one, grab the folder, and go. Like I do. Oop, right? And for those of you on the video or on the GoToMeeting, I'm holding up a folder.
But this one is easier because you can email to the client and have them to confirm the receipt of that.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions on lead-based paint 22J? All right, then I will sign off. And this will be